The old pickup truck coughed and wheezed as it pulled into the dusty parking lot. Elena Martinez looked up from her herb garden when she heard the engine struggling. She wiped her hands on her apron and watched as a tall man climbed out of the driver's seat. His movements were careful, like someone who lived with constant pain. A small boy jumped down from the passenger side, his black hair catching the afternoon sun. The man limped slightly as he walked toward her clinic, one hand resting protectively on the child's shoulder. Elena had been running her small healing practice for 3 years now. Her grandmother's old adobe house sat right on the edge of the reservation, where two worlds met. People came to her when regular doctors couldn't help anymore. They came when medicine bottles lined their kitchen counters, but sleep still wouldn't come. The man stopped at her door and knocked 3 times. Elena opened it and saw eyes that had seen too much. His face was weathered like old leather, and she could tell he was maybe 35, though he looked older. "You, Elena Martinez?" His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much for talking to strangers. "I am." She smiled at the little boy peeking out from behind his father's leg. "What can I do for you?" The man shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Name's Joseph Crowfeather. This here's my boy Tommy. I heard you might be able to help with—" He paused, looking down at his hands. "With pain that doctors can't fix." Elena stepped back and gestured for them to come inside. The clinic was simple but warm. Dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, filling the air with the smell of sage and sweetgrass. Sunlight streamed through windows that looked out over the desert. Tommy's eyes went wide as he looked around the room. He'd never seen anything like this before. Colorful blankets covered 2 chairs, and shelves lined the walls with glass jars full of plants and roots he didn't recognize. Joseph reached into his back pocket and pulled out a worn envelope. His hands shook slightly as he counted out $20 bills on Elena's wooden desk. She could tell this money represented sacrifice. Maybe skipped meals or delayed truck repairs. "I can pay," he said firmly. "I don't take charity." Elena nodded with respect. She understood pride. In their community, being able to pay your own way mattered. It meant you still had dignity, even when everything else was falling apart. "Tell me about the pain," she said. Settling into her chair, Joseph glanced at Tommy, who had found a small carved eagle on a shelf and was examining it carefully. "Started overseas. 3 tours. Doctors say I got metal holding my left leg together and pills for everything else. But the pills—" He stopped talking and rubbed his forehead. "The pills don't help with all of it," Elena finished gently. "No, ma'am. They don't help with the dreams. They don't help when I wake up thinking I'm still there. And they sure don't help when my boy asks me why I can't play catch anymore." Tommy looked up at the mention of his name. His father's voice had gotten quiet, the way it did when he talked about the bad times. Elena studied Joseph's face. She saw the obvious signs, the tight lines around his eyes from chronic pain, the careful way he held his left shoulder. But she also saw deeper things, the exhaustion that came from fighting battles no one else could see, the loneliness of a man trying to be strong for his child while falling apart inside. "How long since you've been home?" she asked. 2 years now. "Tommy's mom," Joseph's voice caught. "She passed while I was on my last deployment, cancer. I came home to bury her and raise him by myself." Elena's heart ached for them both. A warrior returning to find his world changed forever. A little boy who'd lost his mother and now watched his father struggle every day. Tommy had moved to the window and was looking out at Elena's garden. Red and yellow flowers bloomed between rows of medicinal plants. A roadrunner darted between the shadows, making the boy smile for the first time since they'd arrived. "Mrs. Elena," Tommy said suddenly, turning around. "Why do your plants smell different than regular flowers?" Elena smiled. "Because these plants have jobs to do. They help people feel better. Would you like me to show you?" Joseph tensed. He wasn't used to strangers being kind to his son. In the world outside the reservation, people often stared at Tommy's dark skin and long hair. They made assumptions that hurt, but Elena's offer seemed genuine. She stood and walked to her herb shelves, pulling down a small jar. "This is chamomile. It helps people sleep when their minds won't rest." She opened the jar and let Tommy smell it. "It smells like my grandma's tea," Tommy said. "Your grandma was smart," Elena replied. The old ones knew which plants were helpers. Joseph watched this exchange with wonder. It had been a long time since anyone had treated his son with such gentle attention. Most people saw a poor Indian kid and looked away. But Elena spoke to Tommy like his thoughts mattered. "Mr. Crowfeather," Elena said, turning back to Joseph. "Healing takes time. It's not like taking a pill. If you want to try my way, you'll need to come back several times." "The plants work slowly, but they work deep," Joseph nodded. He'd tried everything else. The VA hospital had done what they could for his leg. The counselors meant well, but they didn't understand what it felt like to be caught between two worlds. Too Indian for some places, not Indian enough for others. "What do I need to do?" he asked. "First we talk, then we work with plants that can help your body remember how to rest. And maybe—" She paused, looking at Tommy again. "Maybe we help you remember some other things too. Things about who you were before the war." As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of orange and pink, Elena walked them back to their truck. Tommy had spent the last hour drawing pictures with colored pencils she'd given him. His artwork showed eagles soaring over mountains, not the helicopters and tanks he usually drew. "Come back tomorrow if you can," Elena told Joseph. "Healing is like building something. You have to lay one stone at a time." Joseph nodded and helped Tommy into the truck. As they drove away, Elena stood in her doorway and watched their taillights disappear into the gathering darkness. She had a feeling that this family would change her life as much as she might change theirs. Something about the way Tommy had looked at her plants with such curiosity. Something about the quiet desperation in Joseph's eyes that reminded her of her own father when he'd come back from Vietnam. This was more than just another patient seeking help. This was the beginning of something important. Joseph and Tommy returned the next afternoon, just as Elena was finishing her lunch. The boy bounded out of the truck with more energy than he'd shown the day before, while his father moved with the same careful steps. "Did you bring your drawings?" Elena asked Tommy as they walked inside. Tommy nodded and pulled a folded paper from his pocket. He'd drawn her clinic with the mountain behind it, and stick figures of the three of them standing in front. Elena was surprised to see herself included in his picture. "This is beautiful work," she said, and meant it. "You're quite an artist." Joseph settled into the same chair as yesterday, wincing slightly as he bent his left knee. Elena noticed everything. The way he favored his right side, how his jaw tightened when pain shot through his leg, the dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "Tell me about your sleep," she said, pulling out a simple notebook. She didn't use fancy forms or computer screens. Just paper and pen the way her grandmother had taught her. "What sleep?" Joseph tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe 2 or 3 hours at a time. Then something wakes me up and I can't get back to it." "Bad dreams?" Joseph glanced at Tommy, who was arranging Elena's carved animals in a line on the windowsill. "Sometimes. Other times it's just noise in my head. Like a radio that won't turn off," Elena nodded. She'd heard this before from other veterans. The mind that couldn't stop watching for danger even when danger was thousands of miles away. "Tommy," she said gently, "would you like to help me water the plants outside while your dad and I talk?" The boy looked at his father for permission. Joseph hesitated. He'd barely let Tommy out of his sight since coming home. The world felt too dangerous, too unpredictable. "It's just right outside the window," Elena assured him. "You'll be able to see him the whole time." Tommy took the small watering can Elena offered and stepped into the garden. Through the window, they could watch him carefully pouring water around the base of each plant, his tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. "He's a good boy," Elena observed. "Too good," Joseph said quietly. "He never complains, never asks for things other kids might want. Sometimes I think he's taking care of me instead of the other way around." Elena saw the guilt in Joseph's face, the fear that his own struggles were somehow hurting his son. Children are stronger than we think, but they also see more than we realize. That's what worries me. She opened her notebook and picked up her pen. "Let's start with the physical things. When did the pain in your leg get worse?" For the next 30 minutes, Joseph described his symptoms in detail. The sharp shooting pains that came without warning, the deep ache that lived in his bones and never left, the way his left shoulder had started compensating for his weak leg, creating new problems. Elena listened without judgment, taking notes and asking gentle questions. She'd learned that healing began with being truly heard. Too many of her patients had spent years talking to doctors who looked at charts instead of faces. "The pills they gave me work for maybe 3 hours," Joseph explained. "Then it all comes back worse than before." "And the side effects?" He shook his head. "I can't think straight. Can't be present for Tommy. It's like being in a fog all the time." "So you stopped taking them?" Last month. I'd rather hurt and be awake than be numb and miss my son growing up. Elena respected this choice even though she knew it meant Joseph was living with constant pain. Through the window, she watched Tommy crouched next to a flowering bush, talking softly to a butterfly that had landed nearby. "What about your appetite? Your energy?" Joseph laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What energy? I used to be able to hike 20 miles with a full pack. Now I get tired walking to the mailbox. And food?" He shrugged. "Nothing tastes right anymore." Elena made more notes. She was building a picture not just of Joseph's physical state, but of how his world had shrunk, how a man who'd once been a warrior now struggled with the simple act of living each day. "Tell me about before," she said. "Before the military. What were you like then?" For the first time, Joseph's face softened slightly. "I loved being outdoors. Hunting, fishing, camping with my dad. He taught me about plants, about reading the sky for weather. I could track animals for hours, just watching and learning. And music? Dancing, stories?" Joseph's expression grew complicated. "My grandmother used to tell the old stories. But my parents, they wanted me to fit in with the white world, said the old ways would hold me back. So I learned to push all that down." Elena nodded sadly. She'd heard this story many times. A whole generation caught between worlds, taught to be ashamed of their heritage in order to survive. Tommy appeared at the window, his hands dirty from the garden. He held up a small tomato for them to see, grinning proudly. "He's never grown anything before," Joseph said, watching his son. "We live in an apartment in town. No yard, no space for plants. Children have natural wisdom about growing things," Elena said. "Maybe he's teaching you something." She closed her notebook and looked at Joseph directly. "I can help with the pain in your body, but I think your spirit is hurting too. The medicine I practice works on both." Joseph shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not looking for religion or anything like that. Not religion, connection. To the land, to your people, to who you were before the world told you to be someone else." Elena's voice was gentle but firm. "Sometimes when we heal the spirit, the body follows." Tommy burst through the door, still holding his tomato. "Mrs. Elena, can I take this home? Can I show my dad how to grow things?" Elena smiled. "Of course. And Tommy? You can call me Elena, just Elena." The boy looked confused. "But Dad says I have to call grown-ups Mr. or Miss." "Your dad is teaching you good manners," Elena said, glancing at Joseph. "But sometimes when people become special to us, we use different names. What do you think, Mr. Crowfeather?" Joseph studied Elena's face. He saw kindness there, but also strength. The kind of woman who wouldn't take advantage of a child's trust. "I think Elena is probably okay," he said slowly. As they prepared to leave, Elena handed Joseph a small cloth bag. "Tea," she explained. "Drink 1 cup before bed. It won't fix everything, but it might help you sleep deeper." "What's in it?" "Plants that remember how to rest. Chamomile, passion flower, a little valerian root. Your grandmother probably knew them all." Joseph took the bag and inhaled the earthy scent. Something deep in his memory stirred. A kitchen filled with hanging herbs. His grandmother's weathered hands preparing medicines for neighbors who couldn't afford doctors. "Same time tomorrow?" Elena asked. Joseph nodded. For the first time in months, he was looking forward to something. As they drove home, Tommy chattered excitedly about the plants and the butterfly and the way the tomato had felt warm in his hands. Joseph half listened, but mostly he was thinking about Elena's words. Maybe his spirit was hurting. Maybe the emptiness inside him wasn't just about missing his wife or dealing with his injuries. Maybe it was about losing pieces of himself somewhere between childhood and war. That night he brewed Elena's tea and sat on his small apartment balcony while Tommy slept. The liquid was bitter but warming, and as he sipped it, he found himself remembering things he'd forgotten, his grandmother's voice singing traditional songs, the smell of sage burning in ceremony, the feeling of belonging somewhere larger than himself. For the first time in years, Joseph slept for 6 hours straight. And when he dreamed, it wasn't about war. It was about eagles and wide open spaces and the sound of Tommy's laughter echoing off canyon walls. 1 week into their visits, Elena decided it was time to begin the deeper work. Joseph had been sleeping better with her tea, and some of the tension had left his shoulders. Tommy had started bringing his own small notebook to draw in while his father received treatment. "Today we try something different," Elena told Joseph as he settled into what had become his usual chair. "If you're comfortable with it," Joseph nodded. He trusted her now in a way that surprised him. Elena never pushed, never made him feel weak for needing help. She treated his pain like a real thing that deserved respect, not something to be ashamed of. Elena moved to a small altar in the corner of the room. Joseph hadn't paid much attention to it before, but now he saw it held items that seemed familiar somehow. An eagle feather, smooth river stones, bundles of dried plants tied with red string. My grandmother taught me that healing happens in layers, Elena explained, lighting a braid of sweetgrass. First we calm the body, then we invite the spirit back home. The sweet smoke began to fill the room. Tommy looked up from his drawing, his nose wrinkling slightly. What's that smell? He asked. Sweetgrass, Elena said. Some people call it the hair of Mother Earth. It carries prayers upward and brings peace down. Joseph felt something shift in his chest as the smoke reached him. A memory surfaced. His grandfather performing a blessing ceremony when Joseph was Tommy's age. The same sweet smell, the same sense of something sacred happening. Is this okay? Elena asked, noticing the change in Joseph's expression. Yes, he said, though his voice sounded strange to his own ears. I haven't smelled that in 20 years. Elena nodded with understanding. She'd seen this many times, the moment when people reconnected with something they'd lost or buried. It could be overwhelming. She began working on Joseph's injured leg, her hands gentle but firm as she massaged oil infused with arnica and wintergreen into the damaged muscles. The smoke from the sweetgrass continued to curl around them, and Joseph found his breathing deepening. Tell me about your grandfather, Elena said softly as she worked. He was a medicine man, Joseph said, surprising himself by speaking. He rarely talked about his grandfather anymore. Not officially, I guess, but people came to him when they were sick or troubled. He knew plants, knew ceremonies. What happened to his teachings? Joseph's jaw tightened. My parents wanted me to be modern. Said the old ways were superstition. They sent me to boarding school where we weren't allowed to speak Apache or practice any of our traditions. Elena's hands stilled for a moment. She knew about the boarding schools, the systematic attempt to destroy indigenous culture by taking children away from their families and communities. So you learned to be two people, she said gently. I learned to hide who I really was, and after a while I forgot. Tommy had stopped drawing and was listening to his father's words. He'd never heard these stories before. In their apartment there were no pictures of Joseph's childhood, no artifacts from their heritage, just the practical things needed for daily survival. Elena continued her massage work, but now she began to hum softly. The melody was simple and repetitive, something that seemed to come from deep in the earth itself. Joseph felt his muscles relaxing in a way they hadn't in years. My dad never talks about when he was little, Tommy said suddenly. Elena glanced at Joseph, who nodded slightly. Sometimes the things that happen when we're young are hard to remember, she told Tommy, especially when they made us sad or confused. Were you sad when you were little, Dad? Joseph looked at his son, really looked at him. Tommy's dark eyes were serious, patient, waiting for truth instead of the safe answers Joseph usually gave. Sometimes, Joseph admitted, I missed my family when I was at school. I missed learning the things your great-grandfather wanted to teach me. What kind of things? Joseph glanced at Elena, who encouraged him with a small nod. How to read animal tracks, how to find water in the desert, stories about how the world was made. Tommy's eyes lit up. Could you teach me? The question hung in the air like the sweetgrass smoke. Joseph realized he'd never considered passing on traditions he'd been taught to abandon. He'd been so focused on helping Tommy succeed in the modern world that he'd never thought about giving him roots in the ancient one. I don't know if I remember enough, he said honestly. Memory lives in the body, Elena said, her hand still working on his leg. It's all still there. Sometimes we just need to create space for it to come back. She moved to a cabinet and pulled out a small drum, its hide stretched tight over a wooden frame. My grandmother used to say that drumming helps the heartbeat remember its natural rhythm. She began a slow, steady beat. Nothing fancy or complicated, just the simple pulse that mimicked a human heart. Tommy set down his pencil and came closer, fascinated by the sound. Can I try? He asked. Elena handed him the drum. Tommy's small hands found the rhythm easily, as if he'd been born knowing it. Joseph watched his son and felt something crack open inside his chest. Not painful, but like ice breaking up in springtime. Your turn, Dad, Tommy said, offering the drum to Joseph. Joseph hesitated. He hadn't touched a drum since childhood, but Tommy's expectant face and Elena's encouraging smile made refusal impossible. He took the drum and let his hands remember what his mind had tried to forget. The rhythm came back to him slowly, then with increasing confidence. As he played, images flashed through his memory, his grandfather's weathered hands on similar drums, voices raised in traditional songs, the feeling of being part of something larger than himself. Elena began to sing softly in Apache, words Joseph hadn't heard in decades but somehow still understood. The song was about healing, about calling scattered spirits back home. Tommy swayed slightly to the music, completely absorbed. When the song ended, the room felt different, charged with something Joseph couldn't name but recognized. Tommy was grinning widely, and even Elena seemed moved by what had just happened. "How does your leg feel?" Elena asked. Joseph moved experimentally and realized the constant ache had diminished to a whisper. More importantly, something in his chest felt lighter, as if a weight he'd carried for years had been set down. "Better," he said, and meant it in more ways than one. "The plants and massage help the body," Elena explained. "But ceremony helps the spirit remember how to live in the body again." As they prepared to leave, Tommy carefully returned the drum to Elena. "Will you teach us more songs?" he asked. Elena looked at Joseph, who nodded slowly. "If your father wants to learn them again, yes." Walking to the truck, Tommy chattered about the drum and the sweet smoke and how his dad's hands had known exactly what to do. Joseph listened with wonder, realizing his son was describing traditions that Tommy had never experienced before today but somehow recognized. Maybe Elena was right about memory living in the body. Maybe some things couldn't be completely erased, just buried, and maybe it wasn't too late to dig them up again. That night, Joseph found himself humming Elena's song as he made dinner. Tommy joined in, improvising harmony lines that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. Their small apartment, which had always felt cramped and temporary, began to feel more like home. For the first time since returning from overseas, Joseph started to believe that healing might mean more than just managing pain. It might mean becoming whole again, not just as a broken soldier or a struggling single father, but as a man connected to something ancient and enduring, something his son deserved to inherit. 2 weeks had passed since Joseph and Tommy started coming to Elena's clinic. The visits had become the highlight of both their weeks, something they looked forward to with an anticipation that surprised Joseph. Tommy especially had blossomed under Elena's gentle attention. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, the healing session had gone longer than usual. Joseph had experienced what Elena called a release, years of held tension finally leaving his body through tears he hadn't expected to shed. Now he lay resting on Elena's treatment table, covered with a soft blanket, his breathing deep and peaceful for the first time in months. Tommy had been unusually quiet during the session, sensing something important was happening with his father. He'd drawn picture after picture, his colored pencils creating scenes of families and animals and landscapes that seemed to come from some deep place in his imagination. Elena was cleaning up her oils and herbs when she heard a small crash from outside. Through the window, she saw Tommy sitting in the dirt next to her garden, holding his knee and trying not to cry. He'd been running between the rows of plants and had tripped over a watering hose. Without thinking, Elena hurried outside. "Oh, sweetheart, what happened?" Tommy's knee was scraped and bleeding, nothing serious but painful for a 7-year-old. Dirt clung to the small wound and tears threatened to spill from his dark eyes. "I was pretending to be a road runner," Tommy said, his voice shaky. "But I'm not fast like them." Elena knelt beside him in the dirt, not caring about her clean clothes. "Let's take a look at this brave knee of yours." She helped Tommy to his feet and guided him to the small bench outside her clinic door. "Wait right here. I'll get my special healing supplies." Elena returned with a bowl of clean water, soft cloths, and a small jar of calendula salve she'd made herself. She settled on the bench beside Tommy and began gently cleaning his wound. "This might sting a little," she warned. Tommy nodded seriously, watching her careful movements. Elena worked with the same gentle attention she gave his father, treating his small injury as if it were the most important thing in the world. "My mom used to do this," Tommy said quietly as Elena dabbed the cut clean. Elena's hands stilled for a moment, Tommy rarely mentioned his mother. Tell me about her. She had soft hands like you, and she always sang when she fixed my hurts, said the songs made the pain go away faster. Elena's heart ached for this little boy who'd lost so much. What songs did she sing? Tommy hummed a few notes, a simple melody that spoke of love and comfort. Elena recognized it as a traditional lullaby, one her own grandmother had sung to her. That's a beautiful song, Elena said, applying the healing salve to Tommy's knee. Your mama had good taste in music. She said it was magic. The singing, I mean. She said love makes the medicine work better. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Your mama was very wise. She finished treating the scrape and placed a small bandage over it. But instead of getting up, Tommy stayed seated beside her, leaning slightly into her warmth. Elena, his voice was small. Yes, sweetheart. Do you think my mama would like you? The question caught Elena off guard. She looked down at this precious child who'd somehow worked his way into her heart over the past 2 weeks. I hope she would, Elena said honestly. Tommy was quiet for a long moment, his small hand resting trustingly in hers. Then so softly she almost missed it, he said, I think she sent you to us. Elena's breath caught. Before she could respond, Tommy looked up at her with eyes that seemed far too old for his young face. Could I? He started, then stopped, suddenly shy. What is it, Tommy? Could I call you Mama sometimes? Just when it's the 3 of us? I won't if it makes you sad. The word hit Elena like a physical blow, not painful but overwhelming in its unexpected power. She thought of all the children she'd helped heal over the years, all the families she'd worked with, but none had ever asked to claim her as their own. She looked toward the clinic where Joseph still rested, unaware of this moment unfolding outside. She thought about boundaries, about professional relationships, about all the reasons she should gently redirect Tommy's affection. But when she looked back at his hopeful face, all those careful considerations melted away. This wasn't just about healing anymore. This was about a little boy who'd lost his mother finding comfort wherever he could. This was about family being more than blood, about love growing in unexpected places. Oh, Tommy, she whispered, pulling him into a gentle hug. That would be an honor. Tommy melted into her embrace, his small arms wrapping around her neck. Really? Really. But we should probably talk to your dad about it first, okay? Make sure he's comfortable with it. Tommy nodded against her shoulder. He likes you a lot. I can tell. He smiles more when we come here, and he doesn't have the sad eyes as much. Elena held this precious child and felt her own healing happening. She'd spent years taking care of others, but she'd been lonely in ways she hadn't fully acknowledged. Her work was fulfilling, but it wasn't family. And suddenly, impossibly, family seemed to be choosing her. The clinic door opened and Joseph emerged, looking more rested than Elena had ever seen him. His step was lighter, his shoulders straighter. The healing session had clearly done him good. What happened out here? He asked, noticing Tommy's bandaged knee. I fell down, Tommy said matter-of-factly. But Mama Elena fixed me all up. The word hung in the air between them. Elena felt her cheeks flush, uncertain how Joseph would react to his son's declaration. Joseph looked at Tommy, then at Elena, then back at his son. Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe concern, but also something that looked like relief. Mama Elena, he repeated quietly. Tommy nodded enthusiastically. She said I could. She said it would be an honor. What's an honor, Dad? Joseph sat down on the bench beside them, his movements careful but less pained than usual. An honor is when something makes you feel proud and happy at the same time. Then it's an honor for me too, Tommy declared. Joseph looked at Elena over his son's head. Their eyes met and held, a conversation happening without words. She saw his gratitude, his uncertainty, his hope. She tried to communicate her own feelings, that this had happened naturally, that she cared for Tommy genuinely, that she understood the complexity of the situation. Tommy, Joseph said finally, Elena has been very kind to our family, but we need to make sure we're not asking too much of her. You're not, Elena said quickly. Tommy, why don't you go wash your hands while your dad and I talk? Tommy hopped off the bench, his injury apparently forgotten, and skipped toward the clinic's small bathroom. I'm sorry, Elena said as soon as they were alone. I should have redirected him, but he was hurt and sad and it just happened naturally. Joseph shook his head. Don't apologize. You've been more of a mother to him in 2 weeks than anyone has since. He paused, gathering himself. Since we lost Rachel, I just want to make sure you understand what you're getting into. Elena looked at this man who'd become so important to her. This warrior who was learning to be vulnerable. This father who was trying so hard to be enough for his son. Joseph, she said gently, I think we're all getting into something we didn't plan. But sometimes the best things in life are the ones we never saw coming. Tommy emerged from the bathroom, clean-handed and grinning. Can we come back tomorrow, Mama Elena? We usually come on Tuesdays and Fridays, Joseph said, but he was looking at Elena as he spoke. Tomorrow's Wednesday, Elena said, smiling. But I think we can make an exception this week. As they prepared to leave, Tommy hugged Elena goodbye, something he'd never done before. The gesture was natural, unforced, the way children hug people they trust completely. See you tomorrow, Mama Elena, he said, and the title rolled off his tongue like he'd been practicing it. Joseph shook Elena's hand, but the gesture carried new weight. Thank you, he said, for everything. After they left, Elena stood in her garden as the sun set behind the mountains. The roadrunner that Tommy had been imitating appeared among her plants, pecking at seeds and darting between shadows. She thought about the strange turns life could take, how healing sometimes happened in directions you never expected. She'd set out to help a wounded veteran manage his pain. Instead, she'd found herself becoming part of a family. Tomorrow, she realized, couldn't come soon enough. The night after Tommy called Elena Mama for the first time, Joseph couldn't sleep. He sat on his small apartment balcony, staring out at the city lights and wrestling with emotions he couldn't name. The healing tea Elena had given him sat untouched on the table beside him. His son was inside, sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. But instead of feeling grateful, Joseph felt something that might have been panic. What was he doing? He'd brought Tommy to Elena for healing, not to find a replacement mother. And yet, watching his son's face light up when he used that word, seeing the natural way Elena had accepted it, it scared him more than enemy fire ever had. He was failing as a father. That had to be it. If he were enough for Tommy, his son wouldn't need to attach himself to a relative stranger. The guilt sat heavy in Joseph's chest, familiar and painful. By morning, Joseph had made a decision. They would continue the healing sessions, but he needed to establish boundaries. Tommy was getting too attached, and Elena was probably just being polite when she agreed to his son's request. When they arrived at the clinic that afternoon, Joseph's jaw was set with determination. Tommy bounced out of the truck as usual, chattering about the drawing he'd made the night before, a picture of the three of them standing together under a rainbow. Elena. Mama Elena, Tommy called as they approached the door. Joseph winced. Tommy, hold on. We need to talk about names. Elena opened the door, immediately sensing the tension. Joseph's shoulders were rigid again, and the lightness she'd seen in his face yesterday was gone. Is everything all right? She asked. We need to discuss boundaries, Joseph said stiffly. Professional boundaries. Tommy looked confused, glancing between the adults. Did I do something wrong? No, son. But we need to remember that Elena is our healer, not... Joseph struggled with the words. Not family, Elena finished quietly. Understanding. Tommy's face fell. But you said it was an honor. You said I could call you Mama. Elena knelt to Tommy's level, her heart breaking a little. I did say that, sweetheart. And I meant it. But your dad is worried, and we need to respect his feelings. Joseph watched this interaction and felt like the worst person in the world. Elena was being kind and understanding, putting Tommy's feelings first even as Joseph was essentially rejecting her. Tommy looked crushed, though he was trying to hide it. Why don't we go inside and talk? Elena suggested gently. Once inside, Tommy immediately went to his usual spot by the window, but instead of drawing happily, he sat quietly with his hands folded. The change in his demeanor was obvious and heartbreaking. Elena began preparing for Joseph's treatment, but the easy warmth between them was gone. She was professional but distant, carefully maintaining the boundaries Joseph had requested. How's your pain level today? She asked, her voice neutral. Fine, Joseph lied. The truth was, his leg was screaming and his head felt like it was in a vice. The sleepless night hadn't helped. Elena worked on his leg in silence, her skilled hands finding the knots of tension that had returned with a vengeance. But without the easy conversation and gentle ceremony that had become part of their routine, The treatment felt mechanical. Elena, Tommy said suddenly from his corner. Are you mad at me? Elena's hands stilled. Oh, sweetheart, no. I could never be mad at you. Then why can't I call you Mama anymore? Did I hurt your feelings? Joseph felt the question like a punch to the gut. He'd been so focused on his own fears that he hadn't considered how his decision would affect Tommy. His son was blaming himself for the adult complications. You didn't hurt anyone's feelings, Elena assured Tommy. Sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult decisions about what's best for everyone. But I thought you liked being my mama, Tommy said, his voice small. Elena looked at Joseph, who was staring at the ceiling with his jaw clenched tight. She could see the war happening on his face, love for his son battling with fear and pride and grief. Tommy, she said carefully, can I tell you something important? The boy nodded. Sometimes when people have been hurt very badly, they get scared of loving too much. It's not because they don't want love. It's because they're afraid of losing it again. Joseph's eyes snapped to Elena's face. She was talking to Tommy, but the words were clearly meant for him too. Is that why my dad doesn't talk about my mom very much? Tommy asked with the devastating honesty of childhood. Joseph sat up on the treatment table, his shirt still off, his scars visible in the afternoon light. Tommy, it's okay, Dad, Tommy said, turning to face his father. I know you miss her. I miss her too. But missing her doesn't mean we can't love other people. The simple wisdom of this statement hung in the air. Elena felt tears prick her eyes, and Joseph looked like he'd been struck by lightning. When Mama Elena takes care of your hurts, it doesn't mean you're not brave, Tommy continued. And when she takes care of my hurts, it doesn't mean you're not a good dad. She's just extra, like dessert after dinner. Elena couldn't help but smile at this comparison. Extra like dessert? Tommy nodded seriously. You and Dad are like the main food that keeps me strong. But dessert makes everything sweeter. Joseph stared at his 7-year-old son, amazed by the clarity of his understanding. Here was this little boy who'd lost his mother, whose father struggled with demons Tommy didn't fully understand, and somehow he'd figured out truths that eluded the adults around him. You're not replacing your mom, Joseph said slowly, testing the words. You're just adding to our family. Exactly, Tommy said, brightening. Mama Rachel is in my heart forever. But hearts are big, Dad. There's room for lots of people. Elena wiped her eyes, no longer trying to hide her emotions. Your son is very wise, Joseph. Joseph looked at Elena, really looked at her. He saw the tears she was crying for his family's pain. The careful way she was respecting his boundaries even though they hurt her too. The love she clearly felt for Tommy that had nothing to do with obligation or professional duty. He gets that from his mother, Joseph said softly. She used to say that love multiplies, it doesn't divide. She sounds like she was an amazing woman. She was. And she would have... Joseph paused, struggling with the admission. She would have loved you. She would have been grateful that Tommy found someone who cared for him the way you do. Elena felt her heart crack open a little more. I do care for him. For both of you. More than I probably should. Joseph slid off the treatment table and walked to the window where Tommy sat. He knelt beside his son and took his small hands in his larger ones. Tommy, I'm sorry. I got scared and I made a bad decision. If Elena is willing, and if it makes you happy, you can call her whatever feels right to you. Tommy's face lit up like sunrise. Really? Joseph nodded, then looked at Elena. But I need you to understand I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to let people close. The war, losing Rachel, being responsible for Tommy. I'm terrified of making another mistake. Elena walked over to them, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. Joseph, healing isn't just for your body. Sometimes we need to heal the parts of ourselves that are afraid to trust, afraid to love, afraid to hope. She knelt beside them, making their small circle complete. I don't have all the answers either. I've spent years taking care of other people's families because I was afraid to want one of my own. But maybe we can figure it out together. Tommy threw his arms around both adults, pulling them into a group hug that was awkward and perfect at the same time. Does this mean I can call you Mama Elena again? He asked. Elena looked at Joseph over Tommy's head, seeing acceptance and gratitude in his dark eyes. If your dad is okay with it. I'm okay with it, Joseph said, and for the first time he really meant it. As they finished the healing session, the atmosphere in the room had completely transformed. The ceremonies felt sacred again. The conversation flowed naturally, and Tommy hummed contentedly as he drew pictures of their expanding family. Driving home that evening, Tommy chattered excitedly about everything they'd learned and done. But in the rearview mirror, Joseph caught his son's eyes. "Thank you, buddy," Joseph said. "For what? For being smarter than your old dad? For knowing that hearts are big enough for everyone we love?" Tommy grinned. "That's what mamas are for, Dad. They teach us about love." "Both of them," Joseph agreed, thinking of Rachel and Elena and the different gifts they'd each brought to his son's life. "Both of them," Tommy confirmed happily. That night, Joseph slept deeply and dreamlessly, his body finally able to rest now that his heart had remembered how to hope. 3 weeks after the conversation about boundaries, Elena noticed a remarkable change in Joseph. His physical healing had accelerated, but more importantly, his spirit seemed to be awakening from a long sleep. He asked questions about the plants she used, about the songs she sang, about traditions he'd thought were lost forever. On this particular Friday morning, Elena had prepared something special. She'd been thinking about Joseph's grandfather, the medicine man whose teachings had been interrupted by boarding school and military service. It was time to help Joseph reconnect with that lineage. "Today we're going to do something different," Elena announced as Joseph and Tommy settled into the clinic. "Today we're going to call your grandfather's spirit to help with the healing." Joseph's body tensed immediately. "I don't know if I'm ready for that. What's a spirit?" Tommy asked, looking up from his drawing pad. Elena smiled at the boy. "A spirit is the part of someone that lives forever, even after their body stops working. Your great-grandfather's spirit carries all the wisdom he learned in his lifetime." "Like how my mom's spirit is always with us?" Tommy asked. Joseph's breath caught. They'd never talked about Rachel in spiritual terms before. "Yes," he said slowly. "Like that," Elena nodded. "Exactly like that. The people who love us never really leave. They just change how they help us." She moved to her altar and began arranging items she'd gathered specifically for this ceremony. A piece of turquoise that had belonged to her grandfather, white sage from the mountain where Joseph's grandfather used to pray, an eagle feather that had been gifted to her by an elder. "Tell me about your grandfather's medicine," Elena said as she worked. "What do you remember?" Joseph closed his eyes, reaching back through years of suppressed memories. He could find water anywhere in the desert. People came to him when their children were sick. He knew which plants would help and which ones were dangerous. What else? He talked to animals. "I thought it was just stories when I was little, but now—" Joseph paused. "Now I think he really could communicate with them somehow." Elena lit the sage and let the smoke begin to fill the room. "That gift runs in bloodlines, Joseph. Your grandfather's medicine isn't gone. It's sleeping inside you, waiting to wake up." Tommy wrinkled his nose at the smoke but didn't complain. He'd grown comfortable with Elena's ceremonies over the past month. "Dad, could you talk to animals too?" "I used to think I could," Joseph admitted. "When I was very young, before school taught me it was impossible. I remember feeling like I understood what birds were saying, like I could sense where deer would appear before I saw them." Elena began to drum softly, the rhythm slow and hypnotic. "Those feelings were real, Joseph. That connection was real. The modern world teaches us to doubt our intuition, but indigenous people have always known that everything is connected." She started to sing in Apache, words that Joseph hadn't heard since childhood, but somehow still understood. The song was about calling the ancestors, about asking for guidance from those who had walked this path before. As the ceremony deepened, something extraordinary began to happen. Joseph felt his grandfather's presence so strongly it was almost physical. Not scary or supernatural, but warm and familiar, like coming home after a long journey. Memories flooded back, not just visual memories, but body memories. His hands remembered how to identify healing plants by touch. His nose remembered the exact scent of different tree barks. His ears remembered the subtle differences in bird calls that indicated weather changes. "Grandfather," Joseph whispered, not caring if it sounded foolish. "I'm sorry I forgot your teachings." Elena's drumming continued, holding space for whatever needed to emerge. Tommy had stopped drawing and was watching his father with wide, curious eyes. "He says you didn't forget," Elena said softly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned to listen to spirits. He says the knowledge was just buried under fear and pain. He says he's proud of the warrior you became, but now it's time to remember the healer you were born to be. Joseph felt tears streaming down his face, but for the first time in years they weren't tears of grief or frustration. They were tears of recognition of coming home to himself. "He's showing me plants," Joseph said, his voice filled with wonder. "I can see where they grow, how to harvest them, what they're used for. It's like watching a movie of things I never learned but somehow know." Elena nodded, unsurprised. This was how ancestral knowledge worked. Not as intellectual information, but as cellular memory. Wisdom passed down through DNA and spirit. "Tommy," Elena said gently, "your great-grandfather wants to teach you too. Are you ready to learn?" Tommy set down his pencils and came to sit between Elena and his father. "What does he want to teach me?" Joseph looked at his son with new eyes. For the first time, he could see the ancestral connection flowing through Tommy too. The way the boy instinctively understood plants, his natural rhythm when he drummed, his ease with ceremony and spirit. "He wants to teach you about your heritage," Joseph said, his voice stronger than it had been in months, "about who you are, where you come from, what gifts you carry in your blood." Over the next hour, the ceremony unfolded in ways Elena had never experienced before. Joseph began sharing stories his grandfather had told him, stories he'd thought he'd forgotten completely. He taught Tommy traditional ways of greeting the four directions, of offering tobacco to the spirits, of listening to the wind for messages. Tommy absorbed everything with the quick intelligence of a child who was finally hearing the missing pieces of his own story. When Joseph showed him how to hold the eagle feather during prayer, the boy's small hands seemed to know exactly what to do. "This is why I could always understand animals a little bit," Tommy said with the matter-of-fact acceptance of childhood. "It's because great-grandfather taught you and you taught me, even when you didn't know you were doing it." Joseph stared at his son in amazement. "You understand animals?" Tommy nodded seriously. "Not with words, but I can feel what they're feeling sometimes. Like when that butterfly landed on me in Elena's garden, I could tell it was curious about the flowers." Elena smiled, recognizing the signs of someone born with natural healing gifts. "Tommy, has anyone ever told you that you have magic hands?" The boy looked at his small palms thoughtfully. "My mom used to say that. She said I could make her headaches go away just by touching her forehead." Joseph felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. Rachel had recognized Tommy's gifts even when Joseph had been too disconnected from his own heritage to see them. "We're going to start teaching you both," Elena announced. "Joseph, you're going to learn to use your grandfather's medicine again. And Tommy, you're going to learn how to develop your natural healing abilities." "Together?" Joseph asked. "Together. Healing is meant to be shared, passed down through families and communities. You two are going to help each other remember who you really are." As the ceremony concluded, Joseph felt fundamentally changed. The chronic pain in his leg had diminished to almost nothing, but more importantly, the spiritual pain that had haunted him for years was gone. He felt connected again, to his ancestors, to his son, to the land, to himself. "How do you feel, Dad?" Tommy asked as they prepared to leave. Joseph considered the question seriously. "Like I just woke up from a very long dream," he said finally. "Like I remember who I am again." Tommy hugged his father tightly. "I like who you are, Dad. Both the soldier you and the medicine you." Elena watched them embrace and felt her own sense of completion. She'd set out to help one wounded veteran, but instead she'd helped restore an entire family lineage. The ancestors were smiling, she was certain of it. "Same time Tuesday?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Actually," Joseph said, a new confidence in his voice, "I was wondering if you'd like to come to dinner Sunday, at our place. I want to cook something traditional, something my grandfather would have made." Elena felt her heart expand with joy. "I would love that." As they drove home, Tommy chattered excitedly about everything he'd learned. But Joseph was quiet, processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. He'd spent years feeling broken, incomplete, cut off from everything that mattered. Now, for the first time since returning from war, he felt whole. Not just healed, but restored to his true self. And the best part was that he could share this gift with Tommy, could give his son the cultural heritage that had almost been lost. That night, Joseph called his elderly aunt, his grandfather's daughter, something he hadn't done in years. When he told her about the ceremony and the memories that had returned, she cried with joy. "I've been waiting for you to come home," she said. "Not home to a place, but home to yourself. Your grandfather's been waiting too." As Joseph tucked Tommy into bed, his son looked up at him with bright, curious eyes. "Dad, do you think great-grandfather is proud of us?" Joseph thought about the ceremony, about the warm presence he'd felt, about the knowledge that had awakened in his hands and heart. "I think he's been proud of us all along, buddy. He was just waiting for us to be ready to hear him again." Tommy smiled and closed his eyes, and for the first time since his mother's death, he dreamed of ancestors and eagles and the sound of ancient songs carried on desert wind. Word traveled fast in their small community. Within 2 weeks of Joseph's breakthrough ceremony, Elena started receiving visits from other veterans and their families. It began with Miguel Santos, a Navy veteran who'd heard about Joseph's transformation through a mutual friend at the VA hospital. "I don't know if this spiritual stuff is for me," Miguel said, standing awkwardly in Elena's clinic doorway. "But Joseph said you helped him with pain that doctors couldn't touch." Elena invited him in, noting the familiar signs, the careful way he moved, the exhaustion in his eyes, the defensive posture of someone who'd been disappointed by too many failed treatments. "What Joseph probably didn't tell you," Elena said gently, "is that healing looks different for everyone. We'll find what works for you." Miguel became her second regular patient. Then came Carmen Rodriguez with her teenage daughter who'd been struggling with anxiety since her father's deployment. Soon Elena was seeing families every day, her small clinic buzzing with activity. Joseph had become an unofficial mentor to the other veterans. He'd arrive early for his own appointments to help newer patients feel comfortable, sharing his story and demonstrating that healing was possible even when hope seemed lost. "You should see him," Elena told Tommy one afternoon as they watched Joseph guide a nervous young soldier through his first ceremony. "He's becoming a healer himself," Tommy nodded proudly. "Great-grandfather told him he would. In my dreams, I mean. Great-grandfather visits my dreams sometimes now." Elena no longer questioned Tommy's spiritual insights. The boy had proven remarkably gifted at sensing what other patients needed, often bringing them drawings or sharing stories that seemed to speak directly to their struggles. The growing community felt like family, but it also brought practical challenges. Elena's lease on the small clinic was month to month, and her elderly landlord had started hinting about selling the property to developers. "You need a permanent space," Joseph said one evening as they shared dinner at his apartment. It had become a weekly tradition, these Sunday meals where Elena taught Tommy traditional recipes while Joseph shared stories his grandfather had told him. "I've been looking," Elena said, "but everything's so expensive, and I need space for ceremonies, for multiple families, for the garden where I grow my medicines." Tommy looked up from the fry bread he was making, his small hands covered in flour. "What if we all helped? Like a barn raising, but for a healing place?" Elena and Joseph exchanged glances. Tommy's innocent suggestion had sparked an idea. "The Community Land Trust has been looking for someone to develop that plot near the river," Joseph said slowly. "It's been sitting empty for years because it floods sometimes, but it's perfect for gardens. And the tribal council has been talking about building a wellness center." Over the next few weeks, Joseph threw himself into advocacy with the same intensity he'd once brought to military missions. He attended tribal council meetings, wrote grant applications, and networked with other veterans organizations. Elena was amazed by his transformation from the isolated, hurting man who'd first knocked on her door. "The VA is interested in partnering," Joseph announced one Tuesday, bursting into the clinic with news. "They want to fund a pilot program for traditional healing approaches to veteran mental health." Elena felt her heart race with possibility and fear. "That's wonderful, but it's also huge. I'm just one person with a small practice." "Not anymore," Joseph said, gesturing toward the waiting room where 3 other veterans sat patiently. "Look around, Elena. This isn't a small practice anymore. This is a movement." He was right. Elena's work had grown organically into something much larger than she'd ever imagined. She was treating whole families now, teaching traditional healing methods to younger people, creating a support network that extended far beyond her clinic walls. Tommy had become an integral part of the operation, greeting patients with the warmth of someone who understood that healing required feeling safe and welcome. His artwork decorated the walls, and his intuitive insights often helped Elena understand what her patients needed most. "There's something else," Joseph said, suddenly nervous. "The tribal council wants to meet with you. They're interested in making you an official healer for the community. With full recognition and support." Elena sat down heavily in her chair. Official recognition was something she'd dreamed of but never dared to expect. It would mean security, resources, the ability to help even more people. "When?" she asked. "Thursday evening." "I hope you don't mind, but I already said you'd be there." Elena laughed, shaking her head at Joseph's presumption. "You're getting awfully confident, Mr. Crowfeather." "I'm getting hopeful," he corrected. "There's a difference." The tribal council meeting was held in the community center, a large room filled with folding chairs and fluorescent lights that Elena found intimidating. She sat between Joseph and Tommy, drawing strength from their presence as community elders filed in. Elena had prepared a presentation about her work, but when called upon to speak, she found herself talking from the heart instead. She spoke about healing as a community responsibility, about the importance of combining traditional knowledge with modern understanding, about the families she'd watched transform over the past months. Healing isn't just about individual treatment, she concluded. It's about creating spaces where people can remember who they are, where families can reconnect with their heritage, where the wisdom of our ancestors can guide us through modern challenges. The questions that followed were respectful but thorough. The council wanted to understand her training, her philosophy, her vision for expanding the work. Tommy sat quietly beside her until one elder asked about involving children in the healing process. "Tommy has been part of this work from the beginning," Elena said. "Would you like to speak for yourself?" Tommy stood up with the confidence of a child who'd grown comfortable in adult spaces. "Healing is like growing plants," he said in his clear, young voice. "You need good soil, water, sunshine, and people who care. Elena's clinic has all those things. And when people get better, they help other people get better too. That's why we need a bigger place and so more families can grow." The elders exchanged glances, clearly impressed by Tommy's articulation of concepts many adults struggled to express. After 2 hours of discussion, the council voted unanimously to support Elena's work. They offered her a long-term lease on the riverfront property, funding for building construction, and official designation as a community healer. "There is one condition," the council chairwoman said. "This work must be sustainable. We need to ensure that the knowledge and methods you're using will continue even if something happens to you." Elena nodded, understanding the concern. Traditional healing practices had been lost before when knowledge wasn't properly passed down. "I'd like to train other healers," she said. "Create a program where traditional knowledge can be taught alongside modern therapeutic techniques." Joseph has already shown remarkable aptitude for this work. Joseph looked surprised. "Me?" "You," Elena confirmed. "You've been healing others since your own breakthrough. It's time to make it official." On the drive home, Tommy chattered excitedly about the new building they would create, the gardens they would plant, the families they would help. But Elena noticed Joseph was quiet. "Having second thoughts?" she asked. "The opposite," Joseph said. "I'm thinking about how completely my life has changed in just a few months. I went from being a broken veteran hiding in an apartment to becoming someone the community trusts to help heal others." "You were never broken," Elena said firmly. "You were just disconnected from your power." "Our power," Joseph corrected, glancing back at Tommy in the rearview mirror. "This belongs to all of us now." That night, as Elena sat in her garden under a sky full of stars, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought them all together. Joseph had come to her seeking relief from physical pain, but they'd ended up healing so much more: family wounds, cultural disconnection, community trauma that went back generations. Now they were building something that would outlast all of them, a place where healing could happen in all its forms, a place where children like Tommy could grow up knowing their heritage, where veterans could find peace, where families could reconnect with the wisdom of their ancestors. It wasn't what any of them had planned, but Elena was learning that the best things in life rarely were. Sometimes healing meant letting go of your small plans to embrace something larger than yourself. Sometimes it meant allowing a warrior and his son to choose you as family, then watching that choice ripple outward to heal an entire community. Tomorrow, she would begin planning their new healing center. Tonight, she would simply sit with gratitude for the unexpected gifts that came when you opened your heart wide enough to let love transform everything it touched. 6 months after their first meeting, Elena stood in the completed healing center, watching the morning sun stream through windows that looked out over the river. The new building was everything they'd dreamed of and more: spacious treatment rooms, a ceremonial space for larger gatherings, offices for the growing staff, and extensive gardens where medicinal plants grew alongside flowers that attracted butterflies and hummingbirds. Joseph moved through the space with ease now, his limp barely noticeable, his face peaceful in ways that still amazed Elena. He was setting up for their morning ceremony, arranging sage and sweetgrass with the reverence of someone who'd rediscovered the sacred in everyday actions. Tommy helped by carrying water and arranging cushions, his movements sure and confident. At 8 years old, he'd grown into his role as the center's unofficial greeter and junior healer. Patients often requested his presence during their sessions, finding comfort in his gentle spirit and intuitive understanding. "Elena," Tommy called from the garden room, "Mrs. Carmen's granddaughter is here for her appointment and she brought you flowers." Elena smiled, walking to greet their morning's first patient. Carmen Rodriguez had become a regular, bringing various family members for healing sessions that addressed everything from chronic pain to anxiety to cultural disconnection. Her teenage granddaughter Sophia had struggled with depression until she'd started learning traditional crafts and stories at the center. "Buenos dias, Elena," Sophia said, offering a bouquet of wildflowers. "I picked these by the river this morning. They reminded me of the ones in your healing garden. They're beautiful, mija. How are you feeling today?" Sophia's transformation over the months had been remarkable. The sullen, angry teenager who'd first been dragged to the center by her worried grandmother had blossomed into a confident young woman who now volunteered with younger children. "I'm good. Really good. I wanted to tell you, I got accepted to the university's social work program. I want to learn how to do what you do, how to help families heal." Elena felt her heart swell with pride. This was what true healing looked like, not just helping individuals feel better, but inspiring them to become healers themselves, creating ripples of wellness that would extend far into the future. The morning proceeded with the gentle rhythm they'd established. Joseph led a group session for veterans, while Elena worked individually with patients dealing with trauma and chronic illness. Tommy moved between both groups, offering his unique perspective and natural healing abilities. During lunch break, Elena found herself alone in the ceremonial room, preparing for the afternoon's special event. Today, after months of planning and anticipation, she and Joseph would participate in a traditional adoption ceremony. The tribal elders had agreed to formally recognize Elena as part of the Crowfeather family, making official what had grown naturally between them. "Nervous?" Joseph asked, entering the room quietly. Elena looked up from the ceremonial items she'd been arranging. "Terrified," she admitted. "Happy, but terrified." Joseph sat beside her on the blanket-covered floor. "When I first came to you, if someone had told me we'd end up here, you'd have run screaming in the opposite direction?" "Probably." Joseph smiled, reaching for her hand. "I was so afraid of letting anyone close, so convinced I'd just hurt anyone I cared about." Elena squeezed his fingers, marveling at how strong and steady his hands had become. The tremor from pain and medication was gone, replaced by the confident grip of someone who'd remembered his own power. "And now I know that healing happens in community. That love multiplies instead of dividing, just like Rachel used to say." Joseph paused, his voice growing tender. "She'd be so happy about today, Elena. She always wanted Tommy to have a big family." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands and watching dust motes dance in the afternoon sunlight. Through the windows, they could see Tommy playing with Sophia and several other children who'd gathered for the ceremony. His laughter carried on the breeze, bright and free. "Joseph," Elena said quietly, "I need you to know something. When Tommy first called me Mama, I was scared too. Not of the responsibility, but of wanting it so much. I'd convinced myself I was meant to be alone, that my purpose was to heal other people's families rather than having my own. What changed your mind?" "You two did. You showed me that family isn't always something you're born into. Sometimes it's something you choose, something you build together one day at a time." Joseph lifted their joined hands and kissed Elena's knuckles gently. "I have something to ask you, and I want to do it before the ceremony begins." Elena's heart began to race. Over the months, their relationship had deepened beyond professional collaboration or even friendship. They'd become partners in every sense, in work, in parenting Tommy, in building something meaningful together. But they'd never formally acknowledged the romantic love that had grown between them. Joseph reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wrapped bundle. "This belonged to my grandmother," he said, unwrapping a beautiful silver bracelet inlaid with turquoise. "She gave it to my mother, who gave it to Rachel. Rachel made me promise that if I ever found love again, I'd pass it on." Elena's breath caught as Joseph fastened the bracelet around her wrist. "Elena Martinez," he said formally, "you healed my body, my spirit, and my family. You gave me back my heritage and helped me become the father Tommy deserves. You've created a community where healing flows like water. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life learning from your wisdom and adding to your strength?" Tears streamed down Elena's face as she looked at this man who'd come to her broken and afraid, and had somehow found the courage to offer her everything. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, of course, yes." Tommy's whoop of joy from the doorway told them their moment hadn't been as private as they'd thought. He launched himself into their arms, the three of them tumbling together in a tangle of laughter and tears. "I knew this would happen," Tommy announced confidently. "Great-grandfather told me in my dreams. He said our family was going to grow just like Elena's garden, bigger and stronger every season." The adoption ceremony that evening was attended by what felt like the entire community. Elena wore traditional dress that the women's auxiliary had made for her, her dark hair braided with ribbons and the healing herbs she'd come to love. Joseph wore his grandfather's ceremonial shirt, finally able to honor his heritage without shame. Tommy stood between them during the rituals, translating when the elders spoke in Apache, his young voice carrying ancient words with surprising authority. When the time came for Elena to speak her acceptance of the family name, her voice was clear and strong. "I accept the honor of joining the Crow Feather family," she said. "I promise to uphold the traditions that have been passed down through generations, to honor the ancestors who guide us, and to raise Tommy with knowledge of his heritage and pride in his identity." The ceremony concluded with singing and drumming that went late into the night. Community members shared stories about the healing center's impact on their lives, about families reunited with their traditions, about veterans who'd found peace, about children who'd learned to be proud of their heritage. As the evening wound down, Elena found herself standing in the garden with Joseph and Tommy, looking up at stars that seemed especially bright against the desert sky. "What happens now?" Tommy asked, settling between them on the bench they'd installed beside Elena's medicinal plants. "Now we keep growing," Elena said, pulling him close. "The center, our family, our community. We keep learning and healing and helping others do the same." "And we live happily ever after?" Tommy asked with the hope of childhood. Joseph and Elena exchanged glances over his head, both thinking of the challenges that lay ahead, running an expanding healing center, blending their different backgrounds, raising a child who straddled multiple worlds. "We live," Elena said finally. "Happily when we can, bravely when we must, always together." Tommy nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Can I help plan your wedding? I have lots of ideas about flowers and music and cake." Elena laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet night. "We wouldn't plan it without you, sweetheart. After all, you're the one who brought us together." "Actually," Tommy said thoughtfully, "I think great-grandfather and Mama Rachel brought us together. I just helped them out a little bit." Joseph felt his throat tighten with emotion. His son spoke of Rachel and his grandfather as if they were still active participants in their lives, still guiding and protecting their growing family. "Maybe they were. You know what I think?" Joseph said, standing and stretching muscles that no longer ached constantly. "I think we should have the wedding right here in the healing center. Let the whole community celebrate with us." "With lots of traditional food and dancing," Tommy asked excitedly. "And ceremony that honors both our backgrounds," Elena added. "Apache traditions and the healing practices that brought us together." As they walked back toward the center to lock up for the night, Elena marveled at how completely her life had transformed. A year ago, she'd been a solitary healer helping individuals one at a time. Now she was part of a thriving community, a loving family, a vision that extended far beyond anything she'd imagined possible. "Elena," Joseph said as they reached the main building, "there's one more thing.